Okay, well, welcome everyone to the RecLink Footy Show. My name's Ryan Harris, and I'm very pleased to be in a room filled with heroes. We've got John Bradshaw from Gamblers Help, and we also have the very well-known and well-respected sports journalist, Mark Fine. So good to see you fellas here, and welcome.
G'day. Great to be part of RecLink.
Absolutely, good to be here.
And before we proceed, I just want to pay my respects to the Wathaurong people. That's the land that I sit on as I host this, and pay my respects to their leaders, past, present, and emerging. So, yeah, fellas, thanks for jumping on. It's big weekend ahead. It's that very unusual sort of gap day that we're facing tomorrow, and a lot of people don't know what to do with their time. It always struck me as a curious holiday. But I think that one industry that has found a way to sneak in on that idle time is the gambling industry. And anyone who's watched a bit of footy media over the last few days, particularly the Brownlow medal, there was just a preponderance of gambling messaging out there that, it was almost, almost offensive in its, volume. Finally, I might just kick it over to you first. What do you think about that level of advertising in sport for gambling?
Oh, look, it's invasive, it's pervasive, and I actually believe it's been loopholed into the Brownlow because during a football match, actually whilst the game is on, it's illegal to advertise odds within a game for that game. And that is very attractive to gamblers and, of course, for people fighting a gambling addiction. It's almost the light that attracts the moths. But during the Brownlow medal, for some reason, they haven't written up the act so as to preclude gambling odds being changed during the Brownlow. And I was staggered at not only the amount of offerings that were being provided, but the fact that even, let's say, sort of 2/3 of the way through the Brownlow, they were advertising a brand new market for the last 8 rounds, as though to say, well, if you've turned on late, you haven't missed out, keep gambling. And of course, the major sponsor, and I'm happy to name them. I'm not saying I'm naming and shaming, but Sportsbet, Bet365, Ladbrokes are relentless in their pursuit of new gamblers. And it is new gamblers that they're looking for because of these new offerings.
And John, I hope Finey hasn't stolen your thunder there, but what's your thoughts on it coming from a background where you see the sort of end result or I guess the downstream consequences of gambling, through Gamblers Help?
Yeah, so I work in community engagement for Gamblers Help, and thanks, Finey. You've illustrated the points really lucidly there. So my work is mainly around schools and community organisations such as RecLink and spreading the prevention message. And yeah, certainly the pervasiveness of the online betting apps, it doesn't help our work where we talk to young kids. This is the first generation of young people who have grown up with gambling being a normal part of their sport. So really our work is to interrupt that normalisation. And this week especially, and coming up to things like Spring Racing Carnival, it's more important than ever to spread that message that we do of loving the game and not the odds. Loving the game for what it is, the pure enjoyment of sport. That's where RecLink does such a great job. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult when it's in your face all the time, and it's that saturation that Finey spoke about that really makes it feel normal when it's anything but.
And just to that point. My wife, who neither gambles nor knows the first thing about football, was involved in a footy tipping competition this year at her work. And that's sort of a fun involvement. And within 2 or 3 weeks, she was asking me to explain what odds were so she could establish who the favourites were, because I don't know what app they do their footy tipping on. They provide odds for each game. Now, what have odds got to do with footy tipping? Nothing, other than, of course, it's sponsored by a bookmaker. And she wanted to know what 4 to 5 meant and 2 to 1 and what these numbers were. So somebody who never gambles wanted to familiarise herself with these odds to better understand what footy tipping was. And I thought, well, if we've come to that point, then we have got blanket ground saturation. Who misses out on gambling odds and the message? Nobody.
Yeah, it's a good point, Finey. And a lot of the work we do within workplaces seeks to kind of interrupt that. That's part of the normalisation. So, footy tip-ins are part of some workplaces. We seek to make it more fun-based, not looking at the odds at all, and it can get quite dangerous when there's big prizes involved.
And they're very innovative, aren't they? The gambling industry. I mean, they'll find a way, as Finey said, whether it's coming in late on something they can bet on, but also coming in early with our kids, and the apps that are on kids' iPads now are really just primers for, later engagement with, gambling, hardcore gambling. But, on the surface, it looks like, well, it's just a pastime, but actually it starts a lot younger than that, doesn't it, John? I mean, talking about the neurochemistry and lighting up those little beeps in our brain, which we've all got and activated in different ways, but it starts early, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. You only have to look at, when we are allowed to go out to a restaurant, and you'll see a young person with an iPad, swipe, 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 and it starts from there and builds on, really, and builds those neural pathways in the brain. The dopamine hit as kids get a little bit older, the music and the bright lights you see on the screen makes that connection. People often ask me, well, if my child is playing what we call a social casino game, something like Candy Crush or one of those games where there's tokens involved, but you're not actually spending any money, is that harmful? Well, yes, it actually is, because number one, you're spending more time on screen when you could be doing other things. But it's also a real gateway into building confidence in those kind of games. It is a real gateway to casino games online and in the pokies as well, where you are spending real money. You imagine a kid, Ron, who will play a social casino game and they'll get thousands and thousands of credits and got multiple levels, and then they do that for real, in terms of going to an online casino or going in person to the pokies. They think it's easy because they've done it already.
And I mean, the sports that we love, like Aussie rules footy, I mean, that should be exciting enough to just watch it, whether your team's playing or not on the weekend. But I mean, how much sort of sensory stimulation can we take when you've got, maybe a week's groceries riding on it? I mean, to me, like, it in itself is something worth watching. It just seems like we're just overloading with weight and gravity, that's not necessary. I mean, it's a great spectacle in itself, isn't it?
I mean, I've got to say, look, I've always had a bet. Yeah. Probably started before I was 18. Probably, no, definitely. That was the most fun. And I sort of grew up betting with greyhounds and horses, and I would say that in fact, I know as a fact, I've had one bet on the football in my life. It was in 1997 when St Kilda was in the grand final, and I bet against St Kilda because I thought if they lost, then I can collect some money.
I've had the same thought, Finey. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, St Kilda a very short price.
It's an each way, isn't it? It's an each way, because either you don't care or you've got some sort of. It's attractive, isn't it? Actually, I thought you were going to say you had one bet on the footy, and it was the Reclink Grand Final with Sacred Heart versus Odyssey Blues. But
when I was umpiring?
Yeah, when you're umpiring, yeah, even worse.
That might be contrary to the rules. But in fact, it's a funny story because that must have been the early start of sports bookmaking, because I've never had an account with a sports bookmaker. And I got a friend of mine to put the bet on, and he's quite a malicious Richmond supporter, and he handed me the winning money with this huge smile on my face, because in the end I couldn't have cared less about the money. And he goes, hey, you won. But people are shocked that I don't bet on the football. Yeah. And it doesn't enhance the experience for me at all. I mean, I couldn't have stakes higher when St Kilda are playing, whether that's
that's right,
seniors, pre-season, AFLW. I'm heavily involved emotionally there. That's and right. I can find a case against most teams, as I say, particularly against the three Cs, Carlton, Collingwood and Essendon, and you can work that out. sort of Melbourne Footscrays or Bulldogs is a funny grand final because I don't dislike either of them particularly, but so that'll be a bit different. But I grew up having a huge emotional connection to football, loving watching football, sitting on the edge of my seat, never with a thought of putting any money on it. I just, and gee, I hope we can convince, and I know that there's a great campaign out at the moment. I know Jimmy Webster from St Kilda's involved in it. And, the game's more than enough to get involved in.
Yeah.
I mean, I get heavily involved in the EPL. I love West Ham, hate the big clubs. I like Major League Baseball. I love the Red Sox. I hate the Yankees. If you need to enhance that experience, you've been had, people. You've been sold the sizzle, and you're missing out on the sausage.
That's right. And John, we're not moralising here either, are we? We're not endorsing a wowser society because let's face it, if gambling was illegal, there would be illegal gambling.
Yeah, there would be. And, we're big enough and ugly enough to say that it's part of society and we're not ignoring it. But it needs to be, and we have to say about 80% of people in the country don't gamble. It's the other 20% that experience those low and moderate harms that really concerns the VRGF. But it needs to be part. We always say to kids, to older people, it's a way to spend money and not to make money. That's my one takeaway message. It's always a way to spend money and not to make money. And if you have that in your head, this week, that's something that's really important.
And so heading into the weekend, John, so just as a bit of background, RecLink typically put on an AA versus NA football match on would have been tomorrow. Because, particularly, whether it's gambling or, alcohol, the sort of attraction or the lure around these events is huge. So we would traditionally provide a game, a safe space for those in recovery to come down and play footy, celebrate the sport, celebrate community, free of gambling, free of alcohol, and that's not there. So we're not able to meet in person. So what would be some of your tips or your, setup preventers that you might offer to someone who's, looking at the weekend ahead and have an awareness that, this could be trouble for me?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ron. And a lot of the things that I think RecLink are excellent at doing at the moment are things that you can continue in grand final week. So it's, ringing a mate, that social connection, getting online, having a chat to someone you care about, getting out and about. Now the weather's getting a couple of degrees warmer for me in Ballarat and for everyone else around the state. Getting out, getting physically active as well is really important. Putting limits on your screen time is something that I do and something I know is really, really important, especially when there's, pop-ups coming on your phone from social media. A couple of tips that I do is I briefcase my apps. So if I don't need them, I delete them. So I've deleted my Facebook app quite recently. So I only look at Facebook on my browser, and that has instantly limited the amount of adverts I get from gambling companies and other organisations. And B, it means I just look at it when I really, really need to. So putting your apps away, even going on your iPhone and setting limits for certain apps as well. So you're actually limiting your screen time. So putting your phone away during games, I think for me as well, is really, really important. So just concentrating on the game at game time and nothing else.
And what might be something that, if someone's doing a bit of a sort of inventory of their gambling habits, what might be some of the indicators that actually it's, costing you more than just money, as the saying goes?
Yep. So it always should be part, if you do have the odd bet, it always should be part of your discretionary, budget. So part of the money that you can afford to lose. That's my number one tip. So if you're going to lay a bet, you afford to lose the money. Keeping it small, same as anything. If you go and buy a chocky bar, it's part of your discretionary. It's sometimes money, isn't it? And making sure that your budget is tight enough so you're not borrowing money from other parts of your budget. So you're not, chasing a win or using gambling as a way of paying part of the groceries or seeing the bright lights to actually spend money on something that you you want rather than something that you need. So we talk a lot about wants and needs with all ages of people. You need to make sure you've paid yourself first. You paid your bills. You've got your groceries sorted. You paid your rent or your mortgage and utilities.
Yeah.
And then when you've got a bit of money left over, that's when you can, use that bit of money for other things that you want.
And finally, I was really keen to bring you in because, telling a bit of the backstory of RecLink and some of your involvement, it really included the program The Right Time, which sort of emanated out of, your friendship with Gavin Krasiska and his involvement with RecLink. And, I think that sorely missed that injection of social awareness in the sports scene, particularly at the moment, to offset, the gambling and the alcohol and all that stuff that goes with it. I mean, tell us a little bit about that show and the education process, perhaps for you, in hosting that.
Well, I mean, its genesis was a bit of a shock to me because I had been involved with RecLink for a couple of years as an umpire, and I'd umpired Gavin a couple of times, and I thought that Gavin had, like myself, sort of been asked down to help out, and that was the reason he was involved. Former Collingwood footballer, obviously. He was with the Salvation Hawks. And I got a call from him, and he said, I'd like to meet you for a coffee, a couple of years after I'd started with RecLink. And he explained that there was going to be an article in the paper tomorrow. It was the front page, because he had a very frank and open discussion with Eddie Maguire. And virtually for his entire football career, he had been addicted to substances, to marijuana, to speed, and was making this public. And he said, what's going to happen, there's going to be this big sort of explosion of interest, and after a week it'll be fish and chip wrappers. Is there any way with your program that we can give it a bit of an ongoing life? And that was the birth of The Right Time. And we did it once a week. And I learned, look, I'd studied psychology. I actually have a psychology major without a degree, but a major at Swinburne University. And I did that later in life, though it was mainly centred on developmental psychology, which is birth through to teenage years. But the sort of, the brain and how it works interests me greatly. So I went to basically addiction high, over the years, learning and then following it up and reading and understanding more and more about the dynamic, and then looking at my own life and my own behaviours. And then as my children grew up and continue to grow up, just monitoring their behaviours. Again, mainly probably the one sort of flashing light has been their phones and their online screen time, and trying to sort of mitigate that. No, not mitigate, that means pissing. I'm looking for a word.
Mitigate.
Mitigate.
Yeah. Well, that's a bad misuse of the English language. But the program opened my eyes to the depth of despair around addiction. And really interestingly, gambling addiction to me is the almost, for self-worth, the most poisonous, because people loathe themselves for, and it's a spiral. And that to me is what addiction's all about, when it becomes so harmful and so dangerous. But when a person is taking from their family budget and delving into the family mortgage, etc., we learnt through the program and working with David Schwartz that this often has the most catastrophic of endings. And the difference between a gambling addiction and addiction to narcotics, I set alcohol aside here, is that you have to live in a world where gambling is legal. So the ads are on TV, the big bright lights of the casino are there, the billboards are there, people are going to talk about it at work, etc., etc. So it's very difficult, if you have a gambling addiction, to shield yourself from the temptation and from its ever-presence in society.
Well, and
It's-
in one
yeah.
night, Finey, one night at Crown, you could put your kids in debt for the rest of their life. Effectively.
Yeah, and people get
like-
desperate.
Yeah.
They have a plan. That this is not apocryphal. This happens, and it's happened. They have a plan that says, I'm going to take whatever I've got left. If I lose it, I'm going to keep driving and go to the Westgate Bridge and take my own life. I mean, it's horrific, and it's a personal hell that has very few outlets. It's very hard for people to just turn it off. And then, incredibly, in my own life, a friend of mine, unbeknownst to us, who was part of we thought, harmless annual trip to Adelaide, where we all went. We went to the races and went to the footy and that. And we knew that he liked gambling. And this was a close friend of mine. During this period, got arrested he was a bookkeeper, and he had defrauded a client of over $100,000, which he gambled on, not pokies. People always seem to point to the pokies, never played the pokies. It was horse racing. And it all became very real for me when I was called as a witness at the county court during his trial. And it was very, very real. And that person, by the way, and I want to make this point, that person was able, but of course had to sell everything he'd worked for in his life.
Yeah.
He had to sell the unit that he lived in. He avoided a custodial sentence. He was able to get back on his feet thanks to Gamblers Anonymous. Many of those people were at his trial. He hadn't been married to that point, mainly because he had this obsession with gambling that was sort of private but very real. He's now married and an active part of Gamblers Anonymous, and has moved. So
recovery is possible, isn't it, as well? And
it was not only possible, it was for him salvation, and it didn't just save him from prison, it improved his life manifold.
And I guess unfortunately I've messed up our time with this meeting. I'd love to talk to you guys for longer, so we've only got a few more minutes. But finally, I mean, that is a really apt way to finish it, isn't it? That recovery is possible from this. And John, that we're not moralising, but it is about raising awareness, and it is about providing a little bit of hope that there are others there that have gone before us in addiction and recovery who can show the way and lead the way, and that it is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we always say at Gamblers Help, there's always help, there's always hope. And the help available could be different from one person to the next. So one person might need some intense therapeutic counselling. Another person might just need some financial counselling that we provide, just to formulate a budget so they know where their money's going, and they know, sometimes they need to see it in black and white, what they've lost. And that can be their first step of recovery.
Yeah. And just also, people would be surprised how understanding and forgiving friends and family are, and employees and workmates are, if you're honest with them. And in fact, how rewarding it is for friends and family and workmates to lend a helping hand to somebody who has truly stumbled but reaches up for help. So, it's sort of an honour to be able to help somebody in their recovery, and rather than internalise it and believe that the shame is too great to share, you'd be surprised how much a person who helps gets out of it as well.
Yeah, and that's a message we hear time and time again, that, if you name it and tame it, that actually the community is there to support. I mean, we want to see people get better. It's not about punishment. Fellas, really thank you for your time, Finey and John. Great to catch up. Really good combination there. Before we go, and this was the original intention, was to talk footy. John, who do you think's going to win?
Well, I'm a Geelong supporter by marriage. So I thought the Demons are very impressive. I thought both teams are very impressive in the prelims.
Yeah.
I think Melbourne have just got a little bit more over the course of the year. They've just been very, very impressive in all areas. So I'll go for Melbourne in a tight one.
Good one. And finally, we certainly miss your final siren show. We'd love to hear more of you soon. But who do you think?
Hang on, you don't have to miss it. There's Footyology Final Siren on Zoom, and I'm part of the Footyology. Rowan Connolly and I do the Footyology podcast and Twitter. Now, the Zoom program, Footyology Final Siren, that'll be on after the grand final.
Okay.
Straight after. So you just need to go to Footyology website and you'll follow the links. Now, is it John who I'm working with?
Yep.
In Ballarat. Now, John, you've got an accent somewhere from the southeast of England, don't you?
I do. I'll just change my screen and you can see exactly where I'm from. I'm a Luton Town fan, finally.
Oh, God. Artificial pictures.
Artificial pitches, yeah, that was our advantage in the 1980s.
Yeah. Now, Luton were part of something very interesting 3 years ago.
Go on, we've done a lot of interesting things, finally.
All right, Luton. This went within an inch of happening. The champions, I think, 3 years ago. No, it must have been longer now. It's longer. It's like 5 years ago. Okay. Anyhow, you'd know when it was. In EPL were Leicester.
Yep.
In the third division, in League One was maybe, it might have been Luton. Have you been up to?
I think it was. Are we talking all the L's? Are we talking?
Yeah. Only Leeds mucked it up because there was Lincoln City, Leyton Orient, Luton Town, Leeds came second, and Liverpool.
That's right. Yep.
And that's amazing because there's only 6 L's in all of those 5 grades of football.
Yeah,
I'm into that sort of thing.
All right, so finally, who's going to win?
I've tipped the Doggies.
Out. The Doggies?
Yeah, and the reason being because that midfield is so strong.
Yep.
So's Melbourne's. But I just think if you man everybody up and everybody plays well, you've got Bailey Smith and Adam Treloar to put the killer blow on. So Doggies for me.
All right. Well, best of luck to everyone for the weekend. Stay safe, everyone. Make sure you look out for yourself and your mates and get through unscathed. And reach out there's help available if you're struggling on the punt. So big thanks to John from Gamblers Help, and big thanks to Mark Fine. And look, guys, I'd love to catch up with you later in the year. Maybe we can do this again and revisit some of the themes we've touched on. And finally, we'll catch up over some sports stuff, and we'll also promote the final siren on Zoom as part of this.
Yeah,
post.
brilliant. And just for people on the weekend watching the footy, I reckon a real good circuit breaker from the old barbecue and beers and all of that, because we can't do that here in Melbourne. We've just got to stay at home. So I reckon in the home environment, you can control things a lot better, and that'll be good for the seasons to come.
Yeah. Good one, guys. And thanks to everyone who watched the show. We'll be putting this up on Facebook. Have a